My name is Carl Matson, and I am Vice President of Growth for BankVault. And we're going to do a little webinar today about how criminal hacking gangs manage to get into your networks and systems in order to set themselves up to break into your bank accounts and rob you. We're also going to look a little bit at some of the different types of malware that they're using to do this in increasingly more sophisticated ways. But before we get started, I think it would be good for us to put things in context and just really set the scene. I mean, business bank account hacking has become a major global problem. It's skyrocketing in every major country. These gangs tend to be coming out of Eastern Europe, Russia, and China. And the existing security models that businesses are using in the form of things like firewalls and antivirus and anti-malware software really don't work. And they're always going to be behind the curve. So today we're going to look at how that actually came to be and what's going on so that you can be better prepared to protect your own business. So thank you. This is a really telling graph. It tells you, how the amount of monetary damage caused by reported cybercrimes. And this is reported to an agency that we call the IC3, the Internet Crimes Complaint Center. Now, an important thing to note about this data is that these are only claimed losses. So we're talking about $800 million in the United States in 2014. But that's not a comprehensive number because many businesses are unaware that the IC3 even exists. And also, there are a fair number of businesses who, after being robbed, do not do anything to report their crime. And they don't do that because they don't want their credibility or their reputation to be undercut. They don't want to be known as a business that was hacked, which makes the problem worse for everybody because that means less information is being shared. So, it's probably not a big surprise, but cyber criminals are targeting small and medium-sized businesses the most. They're doing this because they're the easiest targets. And the biggest target or attack vector would be online banking, most definitely. In fact, this slide has some data from a study by a security firm called Guardian Analytics. And they surveyed businesses, and 75% of them experienced banking fraud that had occurred online. And it's hard to read on the slide, but 56% of all the businesses surveyed in that study had experienced some kind of bank fraud. And that is usually in the form of what we call an account takeover, which is, as it says, a criminal takes over the account. So it's quite a problem. And it's a problem that we look at in kind of two ways. One is businesses are pretty much perpetually insecure, and they're insecure because of the current security models they're trying to follow. We'll get into more of that later. But one thing I really want to clarify on this slide is that businesses are also increasingly liable. If the bank gets an order from a business through their website that says transfer all my money to this bank account in China, they're not liable for that being done by a hacker. Which means that if, as a business, you're hacked and robbed, the courts are now increasingly ruling against you. You're not going to get your money back. And that makes sense if you sort of take a step back. Why should a bank be liable for some business who has an employee that was foolish enough to click on a phishing email that compromised their network and caused all of their security to be hacked and then for their bank accounts to be robbed? Which brings me to our next slide, which is there are really two terms to really know when it comes to business bank account hacking. One is endpoint security, and the other is social engineering. And taken together, those two items result in bank account theft. And we'll get into a little more detail on the next slide here. So this is what we call the problem of the endpoint. We should probably define what the endpoint is. So in network security terms, endpoint security refers to a methodology of protecting a corporate network when it is accessed via devices such as laptops or other wireless and mobile devices. So another way to look at it is each device with a connection to the network creates a potential entry point for security threats. In plain in even plainer terms, the endpoint is your employee with a business issued computer or device that is connected to the internet, which exposes your information on any of your network devices to potential risk and theft. So the main reason that hackers, or the main way that hackers are able to do this, is through what we call social engineering. And this is a very non-technical way of getting into a system that relies heavily on human psychology and interaction. It often involves tricking people into breaking normal security procedures, and it is hands down the most commonly used way of getting into and breaking into a system. In fact, 80% of all cybercrime is the result of some form of social engineering. So the point is that people are human, employees are human, and they make mistakes, and they're often easily fooled. That presents a huge risk for your business. But it is avoidable, rather, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So let's talk about the 5 stages of bank account theft. This is sort of how we organize our thoughts around this issue at Bank Vault. And it breaks down into pretty understandable sections. The first one is what we call gaining access. And these are the means by which, or the techniques through which, a hacker is able to gain access to your business bank account. And then once the hacker gains access, some type of malware is installed into the compromised machine. And malware, mal meaning bad, ware meaning software, is software that does the dirty stuff. It's the stuff that monitors and steals information and sends it back to a command and control server controlled by the hackers. But what happens once the malware is installed is a period that we call the monitoring period. And this is, as we say and think, it's the software's learning about you, and it's taking down information. It's in many cases it's recording patterns, and it's doing all it needs to do to set itself up to know the exact best time to break into your account and rob it. Which leads us to the action phase, which we call attack and drain, which is when the account is attacked and the funds are drained and wired outwards and elsewhere. Finally, there's the aftermath, and this is what happens after the account is drained. The victim is made aware of it, usually by virtue of the fact that their account's empty, and there's often an attempt to pull the money back and then assign liability. So let's start with the first phase, gaining access. And as I mentioned, the most common way that they do this is through social engineering. And let's define that. It's a non-technical method of intrusion that hackers use that relies heavily on human interaction and often involves tricking people into breaking normal security procedures. So this breaks down into a lot of different techniques. One's called the familiarity exploit. One's called the hostile situation. One is called, for lack of a better term, offline information gathering. And that could include something as crude as dumpster diving at a business and reading documents. Another form of it is the inside job, where the attacker actually takes a job with the business it's going to rob. Another one is what we call body language mirroring. And then another common social engineering technique is watering hole attacks. And that is attacks that eavesdrop on employees when they're at a place where they regularly gather, like a watering hole or a bar or a club near a business's offices. So we're going to talk in greater detail in the next slide about the most common form of social engineering, and that's called a phishing attack. Before we do, let me give you a little example that happened in 2013. In 2013, the Associated Press's Twitter account was compromised, and the hackers got in and they sent out a tweet that said something along the lines of "shots fired at the White House, president injured." So this tweet went out under the Associated Press tweet feed, and the effects were immediate. Within 5 minutes, the U.S. stock market had dropped $136 billion in value. Now, AP figured this out really quickly and issued a correction. But what's most interesting is that the hackers were able to get into their account simply through a phishing email that is replicated on this slide. And it just says, "Hi, username of the person who worked at the Associated Press. Please read the following article. It's really important." Then they give them a fake link to a WashingtonPost.com blog story. And that link, the act of clicking it, injected malware into the system and allowed the Twitter account to be hacked and compromised. All right, let's start with phishing, the mother of all social engineering techniques. Let's define it. It's an email that's sent to employees that appears to be from a credible source. And it asks the recipient to do things like click on a link to go to a website, or click on a special offer to save 50% on a new high-definition TV, or, download this funny clip from one of last night's talk shows. So 80% of all online bank account hacking globally begins with phishing. And what's ironic about that is that people are aware of the technique of phishing, and yet they still fall for it. Just last year, the Canada Revenue Agency actually did a test, and it warned its employees that a phishing email was going to be sent to them and they should not click on any of its links. So they did the test and they sent the email, and 1 in 5 clicked on the phishing email, which gave theoretical hackers access to the revenue agency's internal network. 1 in 5. Phishing used to be so crude it was laughable, like the whole Nigerian bank scam. But now it's so sophisticated that people are regularly falling for it. Hackers have become really adept at spoofing email domains, making it look like it came from your company email, and using data techniques where they gather data online about you, which informs how they write the email. So they're targeting you with really sophisticated technology and psychology in the form of writing things that would lead you to click. So another way that hackers gain access to machines is through what we call malvertising. Again, mal for bad and vertising as in advertising. So malicious advertising, and it's the use of online advertising to spread malware. And this involves injecting malicious or malware-laden advertisements into legitimate online advertising networks and web pages. So this is how it works. Most of the ads that you see on a content site on the internet come from, a relatively small handful of very large ad networks. And these ad networks, take ads from people who want advertising, and they spread them throughout various content websites according to demographic. So it's very easy for a hacker to create an account with an ad network, create what appears to be a legitimate ad, but then include some JavaScript inside that ad so that when you click on that ad, it actually injects malvertising into your machine. And the great part about it is they put it out on this network and it's spread to thousands and thousands of users. It's very, very effective. That little image on the slide from the New York Times tweet feed is very telling. It says, NewYorkTimes.com readers, do not click on the pop-up box warning about a virus. It's an unauthorized ad we are working to eliminate. It's a classic example of malvertising. So, to sum up, you don't even need to get a phishing email to be compromised. And you actually don't even need to click on the actual ad anymore to be compromised. Some malvertising is so sophisticated that the mere act of going to a web page that has that ad in it injects code into your browser as the page and the ad are loading. So it's very, very, very powerful form of compromise. An even more nefarious or powerful form of compromise or endpoint compromise is what's known as the man-in-the-browser attack. Sometimes shortened to MITB, but a man-in-the-browser attack is a proxy Trojan horse that lives inside your web browser, and it takes advantages of the way web browsers are created so that it acts as a middleman. And what it can do is it can modify web pages that you're trying to visit, or it can modify content that you're trying to either input or take down. and it can insert additional steps into things. And it does this completely covertly. It's invisible to you. You don't even know it's happening. A really perfect example of a man-in-the-browser attack would be if you get this man-in-the-browser Trojan. Say you're going to go log into your bank website. Well, it'll take your bank website page and it'll add fields to it, asking you to put in something else. Maybe it's, your secondary level of numerical confirmation or your site key. That's good. It makes it look like it's a legitimate web page and that your bank is asking you to do that. And of course, when you do, as soon as you do and you click submit, there's another piece of code in that Trojan that takes that information and sends it to the hacker's command and control server, where they now are able to in many cases, log into your bank account. It's a particularly tough piece of malware because the user, don't know what's happening, because all you're seeing is regular traffic back and forth to web pages. So quite sophisticated man-in-the-browser. And this is actually increasing in usage because while phishing emails are very, very successful, man-in-the-browser allows the hacker a little bit more time before being discovered in many cases. Similar to a man-in-the-browser attack, we have the man-in-the-mobile attack, or the mobile device, an MITM. And that occurs when the attacker inserts himself in between the flow of traffic between a connected mobile device and an access point. So this might be the hacker creates a fake Wi-Fi or even a fake cell tower connection point. The phone connects to it, and everything that phone then passes goes through this fake connection point on its way out to the regular network. And of course, the hacker is recording all of this. Now, this is really, really scary because much of the data passed through wireless networks is not encrypted. In fact, many SMS messages are not. And so the hacker could literally be getting your numerical login for your bank account, which is often what they're looking for with this kind of attack. There's also another kind of man-in-the-mobile attack where the hacker goes full bore and actually redirects the SIM card of your mobile device to an entirely different mobile device. So let me explain that because it sounds kind of strange. But every mobile device has a SIM card that has its sort of unique identification number, and that's how the cell phone company recognizes who you are, what account is associated with that phone. Well, now hackers can hack into your phone, grab that information on your SIM card, and then go to another mobile, a cellular carrier and say, well, I want to switch carriers and this is my SIM card. They'll do that, and you will now, the hacker will now start getting every phone call and text message that you were getting on your phone. And you won't be the wiser for it because you won't be getting anything. So this kind of attack happens, the malware is on your mobile device. It waits for you to go log into your bank. It now knows that it has 10 to 15 minutes of use time for the password and site key login that you used. Transfers the whole thing to a new phone, logs into your bank account after you're done, steals everything, and then that's it. So it's a very sophisticated attack. And it happens more to users who are on the Android platform versus iOS, but iOS, aka Apple, is by no means safe from it. So Trojans, pardon the pun, but they are definitely the workhorses of hacking. It's a broad term for a malicious computer program that's injected into a machine, by one of the techniques that we talked about above, and it functions as a backdoor to a remote command and control computer, which can monitor what's going on and direct and make that compromised machine do what it wants to do. Trojans are used for many things. Some of them are just dumb and they destroy your machine and they cause it to crash and it corrupts your data. That's a pretty blunt instrument that isn't really, that's for amateur hackers. People who want to rob are not using that. Sometimes Trojans take over your device to use its computing power and its connectivity to do things like mine Bitcoin or to try to crack passwords. So they can use your machine to create a illegal network of distributed computing. Sometimes Trojans will do what's known as ransomware. The biggest example of this is a form of ransomware called CryptoLocker. And CryptoLocker basically holds your machine hostage and then sends a message to the owner of the machine that says, if you don't send this money to this bank account, we'll destroy all the data and your machine. Of course, what we are most concerned about is Trojans that are there for data theft, and that's what allows bank account hacking. So they're doing things like robbing and logging your login usernames and passwords and things like that, and your activities and that sort of data. That's the spying and the stalking piece too. So it's a broad term for how hackers get your information or use the machine that they've compromised. So one aspect of Trojans that I wanted to call attention to today is the use of keyloggers, because these are also very simple to create programs that are all over the web, but are very sophisticated and cause a lot of damage. And as you'd expect, a keylogger is a piece of spyware that records every keystroke you make on this device, puts it all in a log file, and then it'll usually encrypt it, and then it'll send it to a command and control server controlled by the hacker. Now this can record everything: instant messages, email, anything that you type is liable to be caught. And they do it in many different ways. Some keyloggers can record the keystrokes directly at the operating system level. Some are even smart enough to record keystrokes by turning on your device's microphone and listening to the sound signal made when a certain key is pressed. Believe it or not, the sound made when you press down on a G key versus a K key on your keyboard sounds just different enough to be able to identify. Another thing that keyloggers are doing more now, increasingly, is actually recording your screens or grabbing a series of screenshots. And this is to capture things like passwords that are being entered or other information. So they're pretty nasty bits of software that unfortunately are all over the web, so that any would-be hacker doesn't have to create them from scratch. They're easily obtainable and used, and quite stable as well. Well, here we are. We are at the point in the arc of a bank account hack where the hackers have found a way to trick you or one or more of your employees into allowing them into your system. They've installed 1, 2, maybe even 3 or 4 different types of malware. And now they're getting to the point to where they're monitoring your behavior. And this is really important. It used to be that hackers would just, get into your system and immediately try to rob you. They're much smarter now. And so in the next webinar we'll talk in greater detail about what they're looking for, how they're monitoring, how they're using external data to inform their monitoring, and how they're using all of this to find the exact most optimal time for them to break into your account and drain it. Then we'll also look at what happens after the attack, whether or not banks are successful in clawing the money back, where the liability resides, and then we'll also do a little bit on what you can do as a business to protect yourself. So thanks very much for coming this far with us. I hope you'll join us for the next version of the webinars that we're doing. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to go to bankvaultonline.com. That's our website, and we have an enormous amount of content in there that's all written for the non-techie kind of person. So you can learn all kinds of interesting and scary things in there. But anyways,